Very good afternoon. On behalf of India FinTech Forum, we have with us Jaya Vaidyanathan, CEO of BCT Digital. Jaya Vaidyanathan is one of the few women leaders in the banking sector in India and brings over 2 decades of experience of spearheading functions like financial services, M&A, risk management, outsourcing advisory, and technology across companies like Accenture, Standard Chartered Bank. Jaya built a successful Make in India product suite in credit and operational space. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to FinTech Leadership Series.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you, ma'am. So first of all, talking about the company, we'd like to know how does VCT Digital identify gaps and build solutions that are both specifically suited to India?
So Vishak, maybe I'll talk to you a little bit about how do you identify gaps in the industry, not served by the prominent players in the risk sector as a whole. If you see, there are unique problems to a country like India, which may not be prevalent globally. For instance, NPLs are a problem now worldwide post-pandemic. But when you look at why NPLs happen, there are many reasons they happen. And it's just cultural. It is also based on regulatory reforms in different countries. For instance, when you look at NPLs in India, the outlier events have been the ones that have drained the most resources. For instance, the willingness to pay has stopped the number of transactions when it comes to NPLs in India compared to the ability to pay. Now, I'm not saying NPLs are not there worldwide, they are, but what is the aspect, the willingness aspect, and how do you address this, and what's unique about the country, and what are some of the ways that leakage happens, and how can you prevent that, is something that you need to look at from what exists in India, from a mindset, from a reforms, from a cultural perspective, and then look at it, which is something that's more nuanced than just looking at the problem as a whole and saying, here is a solution for it. So the depth of what we look at are adjacencies left by the big players or the platform players and come up with problem solutions to unique business challenges. What is specific in India or developed for India could be then adapted to so many other countries with a similar situation, or for a unique problem that this can be adapted to.
Okay, so ma'am, as we know that the current dynamics has been completely changed due to COVID, and a lot of small and medium sector has been hit very hard. So how is your predictive analysis able to manage the signal to noise ratio?
So credit monitoring is as old as lending, right? It's an old science. And when you look at credit monitoring as a whole, is that new? It isn't. But the variables that you look at has changed significantly. Earlier, if you say, repayment history was something that pretty much everybody looked at. But there are new variables such as like corporate governance, news, views, and a lot of significant data that's in the big data realm that was not traditionally used for determining credit worthiness. And if you look at one single event, one is the kind of data that you use, the kind of availability of data that you have today, new sources to tap to, and also what you do with the data, which is what you talked about as noise. What is noise and what is real data? That is the separation of that happens through science. It could be artificial intelligence, it could be predictive analytics, it could be a lot of those components that go into making the science as accurate as possible. And that is something that you would incorporate into the data. Now, let's take an example of what happened with the pandemic. In this example, for instance, whole of the past data becomes irrelevant because it's a completely new event. And that is something that you would kind of say predictive analytics has less of a role to play. Maybe artificial intelligence and looking at separation of noise, self-learning based on the data that is more current, and how do you train the systems makes more sense. So it's a combination of different things. It's about what data you use, how do you use the data, and how do you make it very relevant. That's what's changed about the noise ratio.
So, ma'am, as we know that lending or credit is very important for a country's growth, and we have seen that India's private lending is not as much as in comparison to developed countries like USA or China per se. So, how can the bank increase the credit growth given they have the risk of NPA as well? So, keeping a check on the NPA, how can they increase the credit growth so that it can help to increase the GDP of the country?
What happens in most countries, like most human beings, when you have decent health, you take your life for granted. That's the same thing that happens with credit worthiness or credit growth in a country. When the economic times are really good, banks are very ebullient about lending. And therefore, what happens is they miss some significant parameters where they even lend to customers they shouldn't lend to. So credit monitoring at good times so that you kind of keep a watch on the ability of the loan to turn bad needs to happen during good times. During bad times, banks don't have money or they're scared to lend or the NPS is high and credit cannot grow during that time. So what happens is that put in the mechanisms in place when the times are good so that you can grow throughout good and bad times in a structured manner. That would be what I would advocate very strongly, because the systems need to be in place when the times are good, because one feeds the other. And then when you're doing well, even in bad times, then you will have more money to lend during bad times. And then you keep the cycle ebullient. And that's the difference what happens, during with growth economies and economies which are kind of like more whimsical.
So yeah, like a bank need to keep and check on what kind of lending that they are doing. They need to be very sound in that regard.
Exactly.
So coming to my next question, like as we have seen that the BFSI sector or the banking sector has been growing or evolving very rapidly, and also we have seen a boom in the fintech space. So, what are the new regulatory challenges that the new companies are facing in this regard in the new fintech era?
I would come up with a lot of different things. Maybe I'll pick on two to do a deep dive, because there are lot of new regulatory changes that are coming throughout, from regulations around cryptocurrency to regulations around lending to regulations around data to regulations around cloud. So there is a number of things that are happening, and it's a highly regulated industry, and rightly so. So from a perspective, let me just give you examples of maybe two areas. I'm just going to pick in no particular order, data privacy as a new regulation, and just to run you through the cycle of what it looks like. So data, as you know, is the new oil, but you can't have, you can have a lot of oil, but you can't have, too much data keeps a person confused as well. It's more about what kinds of data can you tap on. Do banks want their customers' data to be relevant to others? What kind of data, can be private? What needs to be personal? Changes from country to country. That makes it hard even for a fintech player to kind of create multiple versions of the same software, because data privacy rules are very different across geographies. Now, for instance, there are reasons why there are certain advancements made in certain countries versus others. Now, Europe, for instance, has very strict laws around GDPR, data privacy, and therefore the AI that you use in countries like India cannot be used in many countries in Europe, which makes the advancement in the use of AI more applicable to a country like India, where there's not that much of either knowledge or regulate, and therefore regulation around the data privacy rule. So it's different strokes for different folks, as we call it, and different countries and the adaptations that you need to make around data privacy rules to roost. Second is probably I would kind of pick on cloud adoption. Now we saw just a couple of days ago, Facebook, WhatsApp, everything was down, right? And they were debating on whether the culprit is the cloud or the data is there, what's happening to it, whole bunch of things around it. So cloud adoption, for instance, India has been very, very slow to cloud adoption, especially with public sector banks saying maybe that's not the way to kind of look at it. If you look at cloud adoption strictly, it just makes sense because it takes less time to go up. It takes less time in terms of a lot of legacy. You can be open to having an ecosystem of multiple players coming onto a platform. But at the same time, there are kind of issues around it. If you look at cloud, you could also say that, a bank, for instance, you put your valuables in a bank locker. You say it's not at home, so I'm worried about it, but there's a lot of structure around it. So I think even around cloud adoption, the governance, the principles, how do you kind of make sure the data is secure and transparencies around it and pricing equations around it, all of that kind of is going to make a big difference. So I'm just picking on two ones to do a deep dive, but I did mention a lot of regulations coming up.
Also, ma'am, as we are seeing that more and more companies are focusing on lending to individual or small scale players, and they are moving sort of out of the big private corporate setups, and they are trying to move to lend to individuals who have a good amount of cash with them. So, what are the risks that you see is involved when it comes to lending to individuals?
See, there are different, different sectors catering to different people, right? So if you look at the large public sector banks, then there are banks that are focused on corporate lending. There are banks that are focused on retail lending. Then you have the private sector banks with discrete focus. Then you have banks that say, I do only housing loans. Then you have the non-banking financial services whose motive is quite different, which is more SME, micro segment focused, financial inclusion based. So it's not one answer for all of them. So there are different folks that focus on certain areas and their services become more exclusive to a particular segment. But in general, sending it to a particular individual is supposed to be less risky than giving it to a larger corporate. And the reason is it's more when the credit growth is good, then you kind of lend to a lot of corporates. There's a lot of development. There's a lot of economic empowerment. There's a lot of investment in infrastructure projects and things like that. And when it is more in terms of slow growth area, you make less number of loans of smaller quantum, then your probability of default becomes less. So all banks operate on the principle of, your probability of default and your time taken for default. So that the prediction changes according to the time, and that would determine certain areas. Again, coming back to even if you say retail segment or certain individuals, right? Even if you look at the corporate, I know you asked the question for why retail, and I kind of answered that. But even in terms of corporate, all growth is not the same. We've seen that economic recovery is K-shaped now, which is more like certain sectors are less risky than certain other sectors. So it is all a question of how do you manage your risk. And the risk is best managed in a particular pattern if you have expertise in a particular sector or in a particular, make less quantum of loans and therefore you get paid, faster. So more to less, less amount to more number of people is considered to be less risky in an economy like this compared to, lending more to less number of individuals. And that's the compromise that you play.
And talking about the NPA levels again. So as we know that there are over 28 asset reconstruction companies registered with the Reserve Bank of India. So how do you think that can these these ARCs can help in recovery of these NPAs?
So the very concept of setup of ARC is to say that, banks kind of say that our core competence is, for instance, credit growth or lending. But when things go back, you give it to a specialized company that takes the loan and tries to get more value out of that bad loan, and the recovery becomes better because they bring in certain expertise to turn around the sector or turn around the company and sell it for more than what it was worth, which is the essential the basis of it. But you may ask a question, when there are 28 ARCs, why now an NARCL, and how are they going to do better? What was wrong with the traditional ARCs, and what is this going to fix? If I may, I'm just elaborating a little bit on your question. So the principle was ARC was, bring in your expertise, turn around the company, try to get more value from whatever it is, and then come back to it. But the traditional ARCs were kind of owned by public sector banks, and chairman of public sector banks change more often than IPL captains these days. So there is no one person that owns that. Plus, there is also a question of transparency around pricing, and that kind of prevents a lot better recovery of the asset. Now, with the concept of NARCL, there are multiple owners for that particular NARCL, and therefore it's backed by government guarantee. And it's also the fact that having multiple owners is like you work for many people, right? And therefore, there is supposed to be a healthier competitive bidding, and therefore more efficiency and more transparency around pricing, and a component of expertise coming from multiple sources that makes the recovery much better. I hope that answered your question.
So this brings me to the last question. What would be your suggestion to young entrepreneurs who are just starting out their journey in the fintech field?
See, I think it's a very exciting time to be in the fintech space. It brings components that touches why is fintech so popular? That it's a combination of finance and technology, right? Both of which touches every human being's life. There is no human being that says I cannot, in today's world, that says I don't use technology or money. It touches every aspect of your life, and therefore the identification with fintech just becomes easier. Now, you may say, and a lot of people have asked me the question, do you think that fintech space is getting overcrowded? The answer is not getting overcrowded, because the fintech pie market size itself is expanding. And therefore, there's room for a lot more healthier competition, and more entrepreneurs in the fintech industry are welcome. And it's poised at a time when the market pie is significantly expanding. We went from physical lending to digital lending to mobile-based lending. So even in like a payments kind of space, if you look at it, the pie keeps expanding. And you've not scratched the surface when you're just looking at B2C. Then there's B2B. So there is significant amount of traction that's going to change in the way the mid-market and back office segments of the industry is also affected. So it's going to be booming. And there's a lot of learnings in the industry. You've seen a lot of unicorns emerge from the sector. And I just welcome young entrepreneurs to face the initial challenging times and stay the course.
Thank you for your time, ma'am. It was great interacting with you. Have a great week ahead.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you.